Hello and welcome back to another episode of Kerbal Space Program, where we're playing Realism Overhaul with a real solar system and realistic progressions. That is RSS, RO, and RP-1. In the last episode, we worked on getting ourselves a fully functioning sounding rocket, and it was quite nice. It broke the Kármán line. It made itself into space. We got some science from it. We also completed some contracts and we broke some world records. We had some milestones in our space program, so we are going to get started. And we're going to try to work on what is now known as a bumper rocket, and that is where you have that same sounding rocket atop a bit beefier of a bottom stage. And so we're going to be working on 2-stage rockets today. So let's go ahead and get started. Same save file as last time. This is our career mode save file that we're doing. So real fast, just looking at the contracts, I had already grabbed some contracts from the last episode. So what we have here is we have to do a suborbital trajectory, which basically means we have to get ourselves into space and then back. So yeah, so this was the rocket that we had before, so we're just making it into its own subassembly while we work on the lower stage. This is loosely based off of the real world V2 rocket, but this is not a replica of it in any sense. And since we did pretty well in the last episode with getting science, we were able to upgrade some parts. We're gonna have some better engines today, and that. So I tried using the avionics to hold the extra mass that this is going to be designed to hold, but went instead for just a container on the top right there. So yeah, so now we're just adjusting it, making it controllable, and I set it to be this kind of gold foil to just separate it from the rest of the rocket, so I have an idea of where we're going. And I went ahead and switched the engines to the upgraded versions of the engines that we unlocked with our science. So now we're using the UD-101 instead of the UD-100, so it's got a little bit better ISP to it. So hopefully the changes that we have, just the slight changes in efficiency, will be good enough to really break some records here. And then we go ahead and put the subassembly of the sounding rocket on top, and there we go. We've got our first bumper. So of course we run a simulation, and now with this engine, it has to be attached to a ground clamp because it takes time to spool up. If we were to just try to light this on the ground, or try to light this at the same time that we released it, then it wouldn't be able to get the thrust needed to lift off. So yeah, so just a calm upwards trajectory. I have it at a slight angle. This rocket has control surfaces, or not control surfaces, but I have control of this rocket, so I can move it around and shift it, as opposed to in the last episode where our rockets were basically just, light, ignite, and forget about it. We're just climbing steadily up. And then I tried doing a manual spin on it. I was like, oh, maybe I should do some spin rotations, and that was a terrible idea. Just because I have control over the rocket doesn't mean I can go all willy-nilly. So we're going to go ahead and just restart that test flight. Because nothing went wrong except for the fact that I manually started spinning. So here we are, our second ignition. And I have a better feeling about this one. We're not gonna destroy it. Not intentionally, anyways. So yeah, we're just gonna fast forward a little bit once it's gotten a little higher. And now it's about time to start the second engine. So because of ullage and factors such as that, we have to stage it before we've even decoupled it. So we decoupled it, and then the fuel ran out in the lower stage. So that just gravity sent that coming back down to Earth, while our upper stage is heading off into space. And as you can see, as our engine cuts out, we have a relatively high apoapsis, about 400 meters. But in our impatience, we ended up time warping all the way up to it and then right back down to the Kármán line. So now we know that this rocket can reach space. It can fulfill the contract that we need, and it will break a couple milestones. So we go ahead and tool the tank, because we're going to need that, and then we set it into our build queue. And then now we're working on something a little bit different. We're going to be working on a downrange version of this rocket, because I know soon enough we're going to get contracts to do so, to get certain distances downrange. And so I just, I'm just trying to prepare myself for things, use my time wisely. If I know that I'm going to be doing one of these contracts, it would be worthwhile to have a rocket already built and in the process, so that way we don't waste too much time. So because this is downrange, I tilt the wings a little bit to hopefully achieve some spin stabilization. There we go. Once again, we're using the UD-101, so it's just slightly more efficient than if we were trying to rush this right from the get-go. So yeah, nice easy takeoff. The clamp releases with no problem. The wings don't hit anything, and now we're starting to turn. I like the color scheme that I chose for this rocket, because you can really see that it's rotating, and you can get a sense of how fast that it's rotating. So the black and white pattern is good for things like this. Yeah, once again, we're gonna fast forward a little bit. This engine has quite a long burn time, and so you need quite a bit of fuel for it to utilize it fully. Its amount of thrust and burn time and whatnot. So it requires kind of a long rocket, or at the very least a thicker rocket. So in the future, when we're using this engine, we're going to work probably with some thicker tanks, wider diameters to it. This game is very fun. It's very it's at times it's very stressful, trying to get everything working right and all that, but other times, like right now, when you can just kind of sit back and watch your rocket go and just wait for the next stage in the plan. And there we go. The next stage in the plan was to separate the payload. And this is not going to be our design for our downrange rocket. We're going to work on that. Here I play around with stuff, but I don't end up doing anything with it. See right here, I'm trying to adjust it so that way this rocket right here, the sounding rocket on top of the bumper, will be what holds the payload, because I realized having a bumper that can hold a bunch of payload doesn't really help when that's not the thing that's going to be making the downrange distance. But of course, on top of that tiny rocket, being able to hold as much weight as I wanted to wasn't really feasible because it made the tip too long. So here we are. We're just making a different kind of bumper, different kind of sounding rocket, I should say. There we go. We get our wings tilted and our rocket angled. And we go ahead and simulate. And here we are. We got liftoff. And the spin stabilization's going fairly nicely. So let's just let's fast forward ahead just a little bit more till the rocket reaches a higher height, and now it's really screaming through the air now, spinning very fast. I'm getting a little nervous about the wings. I'm feeling they might be a little too lightweight for the amount of rotation that it's doing, the amount of aero forces that it's getting. So now our top stage separates, and we go ahead and switch to that, letting the lower stage come crashing back down to Earth. There's no parachutes on it, so we're not going to recover any of its costs, which is kind of a bummer, but what can you do? So now we're just we're really careening our way back. We're spinning very fast. As you see, the wings had no chance of surviving. And then because we were coming in so fast, everything else burnt up. And the only thing we're going to be returning from this simulation is the engine. So we can chalk that one up as a failure. So one of the things that I'm thinking of is that these wings that I'm using are too lightweight. We need to get something that can withstand the aero forces a lot better. So go ahead and tool that, and then I put it into the build queue. And then I'm trying to see, I couldn't spend any money to get build points. I was hoping to just make it a little bit faster. Just taking a moment, checking out my contract, seeing if there is anything else I can do. So as you can see in the top right, we just time warped to get through our science node, early rocket testing, early war rocket testing. So we got here, we rolled out the rocket, but it's nighttime, and rather than going and rolling it back and then doing that, we just decide to warp ourselves to morning. We do lose a little bit of electric charge, but for some reason it returns before we end up launching the thing. So all in all, it didn't matter all that much to just wait until sunrise to launch this thing. But we're gonna want to launch when we can see the thing, of course. So yeah, so this is no simulations now. This is real world testing. And with the real world testing, there's going to be real world consequences. We go ahead and get ourselves ready to make our staging. Rather than trusting the spacebar and potentially not staging and then hitting again at double staging, we're just going to use the menus here to click the activate engine button. We're just waiting for the right time. So we go ahead and get the engine started. So it's going to be spooling up while the lower stage runs out of fuel. And then all of a sudden my upper stage has no control and no weight to it because during the ascent, the aero forces broke off the avionics tips to it. So now I just have floating pieces of rocket. And now what I just did there was I reverted the flight to the launch, and then I immediately regretted it. I realized because it was an actual launch and not a simulation, we need to have the consequences for it. We need to make it so that was a failure and not just something that we had a dream about and then decided to come back and change the things. So what I did was, since I reverted the flight back to launch, I am just going to point this rocket safely away from the KSC, and I was going to go drop into the ocean, but thankfully our engine gave out, so it was just time to just do some range safety and destroy it. So that way the cost of the rocket was real, and so our repercussions for it are going to be real. So we're going to just act as though that first flight it just destroyed itself entirely. And so now we're going to start back at the drawing board. So now I ended up getting a little frustrated with this, and I posed my question to the people of the internet, and I was told that my rocket was going too fast. It had too much momentum, and that's what was tearing it apart. So I decided to lengthen the tank and just extend a little more fuel in that, which would give it more mass and keep it just slightly slower, so hopefully it wouldn't rip up in the atmosphere. So I went ahead and did that, and now I'm running a simulation to see that indeed will happen. And once again, we're not doing downrange anymore. We're just going right back to the upright rocket, because the upright rocket that we had thought was going to work ended up failing. So now we have to go back to that before we can even get the downrange rocket. So here I'm bringing up some MechJeb windows to kind of give myself some more information as I go. I was looking for a heating window, but apparently I don't have access to that. So instead I'm looking at aero forces and atmospheric pressures. So once again, the upper stage is lit, the lower stage runs out of fuel, and the top avionics just falls off. Since this is a simulation, I could revert my flight, but yeah, so the top avionics just disappears. I don't understand, and getting a little frustrated. This version of Kerbal Space Program is much more frustrating than the vanilla version or vanilla version with mods. There's a lot more to it. We're running with FAR, which is Ferrum Aerospace Research, which gives a much more realistic atmosphere. Basically, the aero forces on your craft matter a lot more. So your aerodynamics needs to be correct. So it can get a little frustrating when you're used to just being able to eyeball things and just slap some wings on it and call it a day. And this one you have to be a lot more precise, and so it can get a little frustrating. But thankfully, there are helpful people online who can kind of clue you into some of the things you may not be thinking of. And going too fast was not something I was thinking of. I thought, how can you fail if you're going fast, right? So go ahead and we start up that engine. You can see when we start up the engine because a little plume of thrust comes around the end. There we go. Let me go ahead and separate ourselves, and then we do some range safety. we get that blown up. And because I switched back to my other craft before the explosion was finished, it made it seem like the explosion had caught itself up to the upper stage. Yep. Here we are, and then we go ahead and decouple that. And as you can see, our apoapsis is well over 400 kilometers, and so we're going to be breaking all sorts of records with this one, as well as being able to get some more science from in low space. And at this point, you know, every launch is going to give us science because we're in the early stages and we haven't gathered everything. So every mission is worthwhile. So here we are, just tearing through the atmosphere. I wish the camera didn't shake around as much when it shows the aero forces, but there's nothing you can do. And so I was, before that crashed into the water, I was testing to see if the chutes would automatically deploy, and they didn't. So we have to make sure that we deploy them ourselves. So we go ahead and tool that. I save the changes so that way the rocket will update itself. Here we are, still too broke to put any points into anything. So I forgot that I had a little bit of extra science from that thing, so I go ahead and put that into an early science node, so we'll be able to get different experiments, and ultimately that'll just give us more. But it turns out that we can't launch this rocket because its mass is too big. So we just go ahead and lighten some of that and try to change the tanks to be a little bit lighter weight. Change the avionics to... I was hoping to include the new science experiments, but we haven't unlocked them yet. And we're just going to warp to sunrise, so that way we're not launching our rocket in the dark. Alright, once again, real life consequences. We are actually launching this rocket as opposed to having a simulator. There we go. Pretty good standard takeoff. Starting to really get used to this engine, and I think because we use it so much, the engine itself is getting more reliable. We haven't had any failures on it, so that's nice. But these things will happen. We can't get too comfortable. We have to remember that failures will occur. There we go. We clean separation, and then we range safety it, and once again we switch back to our craft so quickly that it makes me afraid that we blew up our upper stage. Alright, and the fuel gives out there. And then we separate. And once again, we have a nice 420 kilometer apoapsis. Very happy with that. Gives us a lot of space to go through. I never really mentioned this, but those familiar with Realism Overhaul, the science experiments will continuously be running as they're in space, and it takes a certain amount of time before they're fully completed. Every experiment has a time it has a counter that counts down the time until it's done. And so the longer that you're in space, the more scientific data that you gather, and that also requires multiple launches in order to gather everything that you can. So that's why even these suborbital flights are extremely valuable, because even though we're not doing too much during them, we are getting a lot of science that will help us start unlocking better quality parts, which will allow us to work on higher quality missions. So I go ahead and time warp my way down to the surface to speed that up a little bit, and I go ahead and look at all the milestones we've achieved so far. It's quite nice. So yeah, so we're going to be getting money for each of these as well. It's going to help. So now the chute that was programmed to pop open at 2,000 feet did not, so we go ahead and do that ourselves. And this slowed itself down to about 1.1 meters per second, and so this took about 5, maybe 7 minutes just to bring it down to the surface. From that point, I went and got some coffee, and then came back, and it was in the water. I came back right as it crashed, but thankfully the contract still completed because it considered the splashdown as the safe return. So just looking at all the stats and looking forward to all the money that gave us. And so because we got 8 points, we also got an extra point for we put it into our science, and then we put an extra point into our VAB. And then I decided to go ahead and put one more point into science to speed that up, and so now our science is going to be completed before our rocket, which is nice because then we can use the science experiments that we unlock on our new rocket and just get it going already. And as you can see, the rocket was almost done. It was 90-something%. And so we go ahead and we edit it, and we put in the experiment, and then we go ahead and throw in another experiment. That's the biological capsule. So you put in an animal in there. But once again, the mass is too great, so we have to change some things around. Bring it down until it's the right numbers that we can launch it. Hopefully soon we'll be upgrading some buildings, but as of right now, I don't think we should use our funds on that. Especially since I just noticed our funds go down when we time warp. I didn't notice that beforehand. I think that's for the expenditures of, the employees that work here. You have to pay them, so you're going to be continuously losing funds, which is why contracts are all the more important. So we're just waiting for mining. For this next rocket, I think I'm gonna take a step back, and I'm gonna just let the footage play for itself. So I'll see you in a little bit. Once again, real world launch, real world consequences. Let's do this. And there we have it. Recovering our vessel. That was a perfect mission. We didn't get as high as we had tested in our simulation, and it took me a second to realize, but that's because we added on all that extra weight. So here we are, we're using our science to unlock stuff. We went ahead and locked the second node of the X-planes, as well as the second node for the engine upgrades and solar panels and materials, all of which the materials will make things lighter. The solar panels will give us access to potentially satellites. And the X-planes, I'm going to want to start to work on those pretty soon. So we went ahead and unlock that. But this one, the last thing we spent our science on was a science node, which will once again give us more science overall. And so I go ahead and push that up further on the list if I can. But yeah, that is all we're going to be doing for today. I think the age of the bumper is still beginning, but for the most part, we are done with this episode, just kind of focusing on that. In the next one, I think we're going to start X-planes. I think that's where we should go next. Well, that's where I'm going to leave this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving me a like, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.